if that's all right with everyone.
Indeed.
Okay, item number 1, roll call. Roll call shows that Councillor Coons, Councillor Perry, Councillor Robertson, Councillor Grenier, and me, Councillor Gardner, are here. Item 2, feedback from public outreach about the zoning amendments, A, Village Residential Overlay District, and B, MDR lot size reduction. And should I throw this right to our fearless town planner? Kyle?
Okay. Give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay, can everyone see the presentation?
Yep.
Okay. So, the last time we talked about this, it was to go over an outreach plan for the different parts of the kind of zoning, MDR downtown zoning changes. So we had a couple of those meetings. The first one we did for the MDR lot size and frontage reduction. So if you remember, that's reducing the minimum lot size in the MDR from 20,000 square feet to 15,000 square feet, and the frontage from 100 feet to 80 feet. So we held a Zoom meeting, advertised it on the Facebook page, and put some flyers up in kind of our usual notice places around town. Noticed it on the calendar on the website. As far as in the actual Zoom call, there were 2 participants. But when I checked on Friday, when I was putting this together, there were 189 views on the video on the Facebook page. So it's difficult to say, the scale of that, were people watching for 10 seconds or 5 minutes, or, they watch the whole thing. But so some of the feedback, we got a couple of pieces during the meeting itself. Nothing major. The first was a comment and a question about, why not going, more extreme of a reduction than the 15,000 square feet and 80 feet of frontage, since there are, examples elsewhere in the MDR of lot sizes and frontages being lower. So the, response was kind of what we've talked about here, was that the comp plan made a specific recommendation, and to go further than that would require a different set of processes. And that also, there are lots and lot sizes and frontages kind of scaling a broad range of numbers in every zoning district, but especially the MDR, because you have certain neighborhoods built at certain times, and they all kind of followed different standards when they were built. So it's kind of inevitable that there are going to be some amount of non-conforming lots, whatever you drop it to. And that just because those lots might still be non-conforming doesn't mean that people on those lots can't do what they necessarily want to do with their lot. You can still build on a non-conforming lot. The majority of the time it's merely, you just have to kind of be in that setback range, and you can't expand, if you're already non-conforming, and make it more non-conforming. The second question was about how, this proposed change might affect allowing more accessory dwelling units and the addition of tiny homes or second smaller structures on people's lots. So, responded that the town does have accessory dwelling units right now as an allowable use. There are certain standards that have to be followed, but that if people were interested in those sorts of things, they should, they're welcome to contact us to learn more about that, or look at the ordinance at, kind of the standards that need to be met to operate one of those. But then I kind of spoke to the idea that while this change doesn't necessarily allow or change the concept of allowing multiple structures on a single lot, in general, you can only have one principal structure on a lot. So you wouldn't be able to have, 2 tiny homes or 2 regular homes on a single lot. but that this could allow for some more flexibility as far as creating more two-family homes. So within that single structure, having more room, more opportunity for people to add on an extra unit to their existing home. And that could be used for a rental opportunity or whatever. But other than that, it was mostly quiet, but the video will continue to be posted on the town's website and Facebook page. So as we get more into the public hearing process, eventually we can always kind of point people back towards those as resources. The second meeting was about the Village Residential Overlay District the following week before Thanksgiving. Similar turnout. Again, there were 2 people actually in the call and about 200 views on the Facebook page after the fact on the video. This one, I thought the main comment area was about the idea of the deed restriction, where the lot would have to be owner occupied to take advantage of the densities that the Village Residential Overlay was offering. So, we mentioned this in the presentations leading up to it, but I mean, that would be the single biggest decision that someone would have to make upfront is, is it worth it to make the property owner occupied and then potentially have that limitation on the lot, in the future when you might want to sell the lot? Is it worth it to that person to do that so they can get the density? Or would they rather, just keep their lot as is? So then if they do want to sell in the future, it's easier for them to go through that process and sell to someone who wanted to rent the property out. So it's kind of explaining the difference. The overlay would work in a couple different ways. One, it makes it easier for people to convert a single family home into a 2-family home. And the other way is if you have an undeveloped portion of your lot, you could potentially, divide it and create a new lot. So if you were just converting a single family home to a 2-family home, it might be easy to convert back to a single family home before you sell your property, because those are all, potentially interior changes. So it would just kind of be reworking the inside. So that might be something that was easier for people. Whereas if you divide your lot and you create now your lot and a new lot, and both of them are under the MDR lot size of 15 or 20,000 square feet, whatever it is, both of them are taking advantage of the overlays minimum lot size, then it would be harder after the fact to convert that back to a MDR legally conforming lot, because now you have 2 homes there, and where's the land going to come from? So after the fact, we had a response from, I think it was the same individual who sent an email talking about how overall they enjoyed the presentation and the idea, but they were wondering if there was some way that we could either put it in the ordinance or have some process, I think, where first-time home buyers who lack experience in the area would be able to kind of know the limitations up front of the property. So if someone was looking to buy one of these properties that was had this owner occupied restriction, you'd be sure that they knew upfront what exactly they were getting into, and the limits on renting the property. So I mean, going into it, I think that was our biggest kind of focus point, and that would probably be the biggest thing that I would imagine would deter someone from wanting to do it. I mean, that's the whole balance of the whole idea of the incentive-based overlay is, well, if you want this, then you need to do this. So, but as we get to the next steps, I do think that when we send this for a legal review, the draft language, that'll be a point to focus on to make sure that that whole owner-occupied deed restriction concept is fully laid out and meets any requirements. The last piece of our zoning conversation that we were having was the idea of the conditional village commercial extension. So if you remember, this was the idea of extending village commercial on a conditional basis down Mill Street. And I spoken with some other people in community development and Sophie, and after thinking about it a decent amount, there were a number of reasons that I recommended that we hold off on this topic for the time being. The first one, and because of that, I didn't want to have the public outreach meeting grouped in with these other conversations. So my reasoning for this was, firstly, it's a brand new concept. So the other two that we just talked about were, kind of laid out concepts in the comprehensive plan. They had specific recommendations, that 15,000 square feet number, the numbers presented for the overlay district, those were, in the comprehensive plan. And those ideas were specifically talked about during that outreach process. This idea wasn't mentioned in the comprehensive plan. Really, there were a bunch of little things that, all pointed to something like this kind of fitting in and being an idea that could potentially tackle multiple things mentioned in the comp plan. But I don't think the outreach on this specific idea from a timeline perspective lines up with the other two. I think this would require more outreach, more working with the neighborhood than the other ones. So you'd either be slowing the other ones down a lot by doing this one, or you'd be rushing this and not getting the proper outreach. And that kind of leads into the second reason I wanted to table this for the time being, was that because this is a small kind of focused area on a single corridor, we're not talking about the whole MDR. Personally, I would rather have that outreach process, and I would feel more comfortable doing that in an in-person meeting, sitting down with that neighborhood, than doing it over Zoom. Managing those couple comments or even a few more through the past two meetings that we just talked about, is manageable. And when you're talking about an idea that already exists, I think it's even more manageable. But trying to get the back and forth kind of relationship and feedback that this would entail, I just think that would be an easier process and a better kind of relationship between the town and the neighborhood if you could do that in person. Third is maybe one of the bigger reasons, is that what kind of led to this idea of a conditional village commercial extension was the idea in the comp plan that certain properties were ripe for contract or conditional zones. And one of the big ones that the comp plan mentioned was the buyer manufacturing lot, which is in this area. So like I was saying before, there were kind of a bunch of little things that pointed me to thinking, well, maybe this concept could tackle a bunch of these. And this was one of them. If the buyer lot was ever redeveloped, then it would it would be difficult to redevelop that lot, as it is currently zoned in the MDR, just because of the existing building that's there. However, applying standards created to, from a conditional village commercial district, like the one we were talking about, to the buyer lot might not match up. For instance, multifamily is an allowable use in the village commercial. And if we extend the village commercial down Mill Street on a conditional basis, people might be okay with multifamily on that corridor, but they might want to limit it to a certain number of units. They might say, yeah, we're okay with multifamily, but we don't want any, huge things going in. We'd be okay with a maximum of, 4 or 5 dwelling units in a structure. But the scale of the existing structure on the buyer lot versus the existing structures on the other lots in this corridor, which are a lot of times single family homes or smaller residences, the structures don't really match in scale. So having standards that could match both things would be difficult. And I started to realize it might be better to kind of look at them separately. If and when the buyer lot was redeveloped, have a contractor conditional zone specifically for that lot, like the comprehensive plan recommended. And then, in the future, if it makes sense to change the zone of that Mill Street corridor, you could look at more options then. It could be a conditional village commercial, it could be HDR if the neighborhood just wanted, more dense residential. You could look at a lot of different ideas, and you wouldn't have to try to match, the desires of, redeveloping one lot with the desires of the whole corridor. And finally, an idea like this, the conditional village commercial extension, I mean, we have things like this in the current comp plan, the village residential overlay, the Main Street office overlay. So I do think that something of that scale might be worth doing more research in the time leading up to the next iteration of the comp plan, having those neighborhood conversations leading up to that, and then having that more as a recommendation in the updated comp plan when that comes. So obviously open to feedback on that, but that was my thoughts as I was looking into this more. So finally, recommendation is moving forward with the first two topics, the MDR lot frontage reduction and the village residential overlay, and then continue to look into a wider range of options for that area around the downtown to see if there are different ways, really defining, I guess, what the goals would be of that area and the town, and then kind of outlining the positives and negatives for each so that we could bring those ideas back to council and the neighborhood in the future. And then so next steps, kind of revising the draft ordinance language to just include the MDR and village residential pieces, getting a legal review, then going back to committee to discuss any feedback that we get on the owner occupied deed restriction aspect, just kind of finalizing the draft language, and then we'd be able to start the public hearing process. That's it.
Thank you, Kyle. And anyone have any questions or comments about this path forward?
Yeah, I do. Is Kyle still with? Oh, there you are.
Yep.
I have a question about the deed restriction, and I was curious if, because I think my question was something about, was the same thing that you had on your slide, like if there's some way to get an ordinance or something.
Right.
My question is more about if a first-time home buyer and a real estate, because a real estate agent isn't necessarily informed, are they, of all of the different deed restrictions? I mean, and you go through so many, there's so many real estate agents out there. Is that setting us up for litigation if somebody does buy it and finds out that they've got this restriction on the deed? I mean, is that setting us up for something? No, Sophie?
I think it's setting you up for potentially some unhappy residents, but it's not the town's position to have any responsibility over the deed restriction. That's a choice that the former owner made. So if there was a process where people had to review with the town, then I could say we could put steps in place, but that doesn't exist. People buy and sell property all the time that we find out about long after it has happened.
Usually covered closings, isn't it? I would assume this sort of thing, all this sort of fine print, if you will, is covered by most closing attorneys.
So you would think that, Sam, but we talk to people all the time that come in upset because they have an easement that the former owner has given away on the property, or they're not aware that the whole back of their property is actually the town's drainage easement, or so that happens quite, I wouldn't say quite frequently, but it happens enough that I would say Cheryl's concern of people buying and selling without knowing is a legitimate concern. I don't think that but the town wouldn't be a party in litigation to that, because we're not a party on the deed restriction, if that makes.
So how would we get it through by ordinance? I mean, I guess I don't understand how that process would work. If a homeowner chose to modify their home, so it was a 2-family home and they were perfect, it was perfectly legal to do that, but didn't choose to tell the next purchaser, and they, I guess I'm not sure how you could do that if you don't do it. And if you do it through ordinance, then the town becomes involved, right?
Well, we become involved on a compliance basis, not on a getting sued basis.
Okay.
So let's follow that through. You buy a house that is a duplex. You don't know anything about the ordinance because you haven't done your homework. We find out. What would flag it for us most likely would be when we start sending tax bills to a house other than to an address other than that address, right? So that you're not living there anymore. We would likely knock on the door and find out who's living there. When we find out that it's not a homeowner, we would then send you a notice that we think you're violating the ordinance, because the ordinance says it's restricted and you've taken advantage, and previous owners have taken advantage of that. Then we'd have to work with you to either become owner occupied or take out one of the dwelling units.
Okay, so is it worth it then to change it, to do
so
something?
That's the whole idea of it being incentive based. The property owner or the developer, because this could be a new subdivision was created, and they want to take advantage of that density, and then each of the lots has it written into the deed. But it's it's their decision ultimately whether it's worth it or not. I mean, if you want to live on your house in Orono for the rest of your life, then, and you have this piece of land in the back of your or on the side or the back of your lot that you don't use, then you might think it's worth it because you're going to live at that property, or you have every intention of living there. So I don't think this is a tool that's going to be incredibly widespread, because it is a tough decision to have to make. And I think it would be more likely that it was used to convert a single family home to a 2-family home, because that's something that you could change back if you wanted to sell the property. But as far as dividing land and then having both lots with the restriction. I mean, there might be some people who want to take advantage of that. But I mean, the reason it was written that way and recommended that way in the comp plan was because there were other issues to look at too. If you, because I mean, the alternative is just saying, we talked about this at the beginning. I presented the topic in a few different ways. The other way is to just make the village residential district its own zoning district, and have that lot size just be the minimum lot size and apply to everything. And in that case, then it applies to rental properties too. And the goal was really to focus on owner-occupied housing. So it was trying to balance multiple things. It was increasing densities, but only for a specific purpose. And it was attempting to limit the amount of student homes that would be able to take advantage of it. So, I mean, that was the goal at the time. So I guess, it would be a matter of seeing how it actually played out and how much it was used, and then making a decision from there to see if it was worthwhile. But even if no one used it, then it wouldn't be doing any harm necessarily. It would just go unused.
I think from a practical standpoint, the other thing we might think about doing to allay some of your concerns, Cheryl, in terms of people not knowing, is the same thing we do with accessory apartments, which is while we'll call it a deed restriction over here and it will be in the deed, I think we could also file an agreement so that talks about the restriction. So it's a separate item when a title attorney goes to review. When a title attorney goes through to review the parcel, it would pick up the fact that there was a separate agreement. I think that's an option that doesn't change anything. It just would say that the town would add that step, so it would be more readily seen.
I think that is reasonable. I wouldn't want anybody to get a terrible surprise, even if it is technically their responsibility to kind of do their due diligence. I mean, the way that I see all of this is that the town, routinely uses zoning to impose controls for development, that to keep things in keeping, to have it be in keeping with our community and how we want the community to develop. So we impose these controls, but ultimately the market decides. So the person who maybe takes advantage of this to divide, their house, they presumably, they're owner occupied, they may have a tenant, they're presumably going to make some money doing this. So if they then want to sell their house in the future, then they are aware that they may have to make it marketable, convert it back into a single family home, or I don't know. So I think that there are options that's between the buyer and the seller to negotiate in the market, and for people to do their due diligence and to negotiate the price and how that's all going to work. But ultimately, I'm not sure that I see really much of a conflict for the town in terms of imposing reasonable controls, just to sort of make sure that the area develops in the way that we intend, or that the comp plan recommends.
I like the idea of the agreement, though, to put something in place, just an extra step with the title.
I think there are probably other practices too, whether it's working with local real estate, or putting resources on the town's website, or making it clear that, for people who are looking into it, that is an option. We get calls all the time asking about zoning standards. There's a potential home buyer looking at a lot, what should they be looking for? So I think that's through practice, even if it wasn't in the ordinance, there are things that we could do to make it more known that that's a potential.
Mhm.
So everyone is good with the next steps that Kyle outlined?
Yes.
I am. Sounds good. And I like the idea, Kyle, of postponing for a while the last item that we discussed, that you discussed. It makes perfect sense.
Kyle, is the Buyer building vacant? That big, is that a vacant? No. Not the but the big warehouse out in back.
No, I don't believe so.
They're still using it.
I think so.
Okay, thanks.
All right, are we ready to move on?
Yep.
Okay, item number 3 is reviewing progress implementing land use elements of the comp plan and identifying next steps. I assume this is also you, Kyle.
Yes. So I'm going to share my screen again.
Ooh.
Okay, here we go. So this was a document that Evan had originally created and I think brought to the council at some point. And it just kind of outlines all of the different, you know, on the left, you have the amendments that the comprehensive plan recommended in terms of land use recommendations, at least. So you can see some of these, you know, everything in green has already been adopted. And you can see each column kind of represents, you know, where it was in the process from drafting to actually adopting it. What we have left is, you know, at the end of the document, there are 5 things really that haven't been completed. 2 of them are the 2 that we just talked about, the MDR lot reduction and the village residential overlay. So those are obviously both in progress now. So that kind of leaves 3, well, 4 if you, the idea of homestays and B&Bs was adopted, but we have already made it to needing to revisit that. So there's sort of 3.5 that are still remaining. 1, probably the biggest, being rewriting of the sign ordinance. There are a lot of inconsistencies, and I know that that's probably the most frequent one that gets brought up. And, you know, just from being in the office and dealing with things coming in, that's the one that brought up the most times. The other 2 are mineral extraction standards. And we have a definition and a use for mineral extraction standards, but there are no standards in place. And I think it kind of ties in with our earthwork standards. But a lot of that one would really be me kind of looking back to see exactly the goals and talking with Evan probably to kind of get a history of the direction there and where that was coming from. Because there's not really too much specifically mentioned in the comprehensive plan. And finally, the idea of reintroducing conditional uses and standards to the land use ordinance. So we talk about conditional and contract zones for certain lots, you know, like we were just talking about with the idea of a conditional use village commercial district. And but conditional uses are something like you know, could apply to a specific use in a zoning district. So like right now, if you look at our table of land uses in the ordinance, you have things that are either permitted by the code officer or they go through site plan review with the planning board. You know, that's the 2 real reviewing parties and methods. A conditional use is something that might be allowed in a zoning district if it met certain conditions, but then not allowed otherwise. So, I know that as an example, the comprehensive plan mentioned home businesses. Home businesses currently go to the planning board and have to go through the site plan review process. But with most home businesses, they take place within existing structures. There's no actual development being done on the ground. And that's really what site plan review is aimed towards, is looking at the impact something is having on the ground. So does it make sense for site plan review to be the method in which we review home businesses? Or, would it be better served as being a conditional use? So, another idea would be like the Stillwater overlay, where it allows, small scale, non-residential uses if it meets certain standards. That's kind of like what a conditional use would be, except instead of doing it within all these different overlay districts all over town, it would be built into the land use ordinance, more just like our normal zoning and uses. And I know that before Evan left, he was doing some work as far as kind of reorganizing our land use ordinance and kind of doing a big rewrite and overhaul. And I think that overhaul kind of put this system into place, but then kind of left a lot of room for kind of filling in things where they needed to be filled in. So I'd say that one is something that has been started, but would probably be a pretty substantial change to how our land use ordinance was structured, even if there wasn't much of a change as far as new uses being allowed. It would be the same kind of information, the same uses, the same standards. It would just be more of a process and ordinance structure type overhaul. But so those are really the last remaining things from the previous update to the comp plan.
So if I may.
Yep.
I think the comp plan committee has gotten to be kind of the experts on land use. And I wonder if it might also make sense to add some work here. The comp plan talks about the use of contract zones and conditional zones. I wonder if we might think about, if we get through all the rest of it, going to develop guidance, like a guiding document for council to think about as it looks at requests for contract zones or conditional zone changes. Just a thought to kind of frame all of the work that you have now, because future councils might not have quite the basis that you do with land use.
Mm-hmm.
Sophie and Kyle, or maybe Kyle, what is the subtle difference between a conditional zone and a contract zone?
So
or is it a conditional use and a contract zone? Is that the?
So right now, the way we do it, we have kind of forget what I was just talking about and reworking the ordinance. The way we've done it so far is contract zone is something that's initiated by the applicant, and a conditional zone is something that we write into the ordinance. They've served primarily the same focus, but a contract zone, but if you think about it more in this context of what a conditional use is, you'd be talking about the use itself, and it would probably apply to a bigger area. So that's why we're talking about, with the village commercial extension, that would be for a whole corridor along Mill Street. Or, if you think of the Stillwater Ave overlay, that's really what a conditional use is, even though that's not technically how we did it, but it serves the same purpose. It applies more to a whole area. You're saying in this area, this use is okay as long as it meets these conditions. A contract zone would be more specific to a single lot. Maybe, the lot has always been operated as a commercial use, but now it's, in a residential district, but you want to create a contract just for that lot to say you can continue operating as you always have, but we're going to make a contract that says you can't do any of these other commercial uses. You kind of have to remain what you were. So I think that's the biggest difference, would be that the intent of the contract would be more applicant driven and focused on a single lot, where conditional use would be a broader area that would apply to multiple lots.
With conditional use zones, as I understand, so Kyle can definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but with conditional use zones, council is saying in general, this use is okay, provided that it meets these very specific elements that you put within the ordinance.
Right. So this would be saying that, a use, you might say, if you made this change as it recommends here in the comp plan, you might say that, a conditional use is okay anywhere in the MDR, as long as it's, the lot is at least 10,000 square feet. You're not doing like the process we've gone through with contract zones and coming before council, and you're not doing that whole process. It's more of a, just as long as you meet these things that we put in the ordinance, the use is okay. But that's something that we don't really have right now built into the ordinance. There is no kind of gray area like that. It's either allowed or it's not. But, zoning districts, while the idea is that they have in general the same kind of feel throughout, every lot in a zoning district isn't the same. So there might be, certain reasons why you would say in general the use is okay in this zone, but for these, random unique lots, it might not be okay there. So that would really be the purpose of this change.
Good. Thank you, Kyle. That makes it clearer.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else on this, Kyle?
I don't think so.
So shall we move on to item number 4, a brief town manager's update?
Sure. Let's see how brief I can be. So we have 3 meetings, maybe 4, planned for the rest of this year. We've got a Finance and Operations Committee meeting for Thursday that had already been scheduled. My question is, can I get a show of hands from Finance Committee members who can actually be there this Thursday at 5 o'clock on Zoom? I got 1. All right, so here's my question for you.
I'm actually not on the committee, Sophie, but I can be there, but I'm not on the committee.
Would it make
I can be there, and my camera isn't like synced with my hands, so.
Oh, gotcha.
Sorry, I'm waving, but it's not, there's nothing wrong with my camera.
So I guess my question for you is we have financials to go through, and I need to talk with council about COVID benefits, but I'm going to need a council order for that anyway on the following Monday night. So I don't know if we want to have the Finance Committee meeting, or if you'd just like me to go through the documents with Tom and have him do an update at the council meeting, the financials. Would that work for folks?
Sure.
I'll be okay with that.
That's fine with me.
Okay.
Yep.
That's fine.
All right. So on Monday night, we have a regular town council meeting starting at 5 o'clock. This meeting is going to include an executive session. I am currently in conversations with the police union, and I need some feedback from council before I can go much further with that. Yeah, so I talked with our new council chair about the meeting setup, because I can either do a webinar like this, which we can control the flow of public comment into the meeting, or I can run a meeting that can then have a breakout group and make it more efficient and easier for us to get in and out of executive session. At the end of the day, we really felt like although it is not as efficient to have a separate meeting for the executive session, mirrors what we do in real life as well, which is we tell people we're having an executive session and either we're coming back or we're not. And this is how we leave the meeting. So that's what I'm going to set up for this month. If we find that it still doesn't work, then I'll work with Belle to see if we can come up with something better. I think we're getting better at that in and out thing. So I am planning meetings from January to March. I am not seeing any indication from Augusta that they're going to remove our ability to meet online. So right. Are you all right with me going ahead and planning to meet through March on Zoom? Mm-hmm. Okay. So I had some feedback I have a couple of pieces of feedback from various counselors. One is that Thursdays are going to be a problem to meet. And two is that meeting on Mondays and Thursdays all the time are creating an issue for people. I'm sorry, Lori, you're muted.
What would you like to know from me?
What I'm saying is that I've heard from 3 counselors. That what I've heard is that Monday night meetings continue to work for the people that have talked to me, that Thursday is becoming problematic for a counselor, and that from another counselor, that meeting twice a week is just way too much of a time commitment. And they would like to see us bring our meetings back into a more once a week goal. So what I have done, if we were to change our schedule up a little bit, and on the first Monday of the month, we did comp plan. Second Monday of the month, we did regular council meeting, which we can't change that. Third Monday of the month, Thursday of the month, we did community development. Fourth Monday of the month, we did finance. And if we needed workshops, we would tuck them in the third Monday or the fifth Monday. So there are some months where there is no third or fourth Monday of the month when we can meet, and there isn't a fifth Monday. However, Councillor Gardner laid out and council agreed to a plan around education around social and racial equity and justice, which kind of necessitated a workshop for that. So my thought was, on Zoom, we tend to be a little bit more efficient with our regular council meetings. There isn't a ton of business that's coming before council. I would suggest that we put a standing workshop if we're not going to have another workshop later in the month to do the racial and social justice piece. So at the end of a council meeting, we would have just a standing workshop to do that. So here's your council meeting, and then we'll do some education. Unless we have something bigger planned, which we would do in a workshop. So if somebody told me they had an hour-long presentation because they just finished a 5-week class, then we would make that a special kind of standalone workshop. Does that work?
Yep. Yeah, so I didn't know that you're waiting for me. I haven't told you there's a problem with the meetings because there hasn't been a problem with the meetings for me on Monday and Thursday nights. And I'm available, and your suggestions sound fine to me.
Hey, Soph, what about timing? I wouldn't have a problem. I mean, if we have a 2-hour council meeting on Monday, and then we have a workshop right after that.
So I would work really hard if it's possible. So like in the month of January, I think we've got 5 Mondays. I haven't looked, but I think there are 5 Mondays.
Yeah.
That month I probably would keep. Yeah, one of them gets hit out, but you've got 4 left. Right. I would keep a workshop on that Monday.
Okay.
There's only 4 Mondays in January.
Okay, right. So that's a bad example.
21st and 28th. Oh no, I'm sorry. That's December.
No, there's 5.
No,
the 11th, 18th, and 25th in January.
Yep, just 4.
Yeah, there's 5 in January.
But there are 5 in March. So I think, Cheryl, what I have heard, Tom and I met for quite a while on Friday, and one of the things we talked about is the need to be as efficient as we can with our time. And I think I've talked a little bit with each of the committee chairs about a desire not to keep recycling, to try to build stairs as opposed to a cycle.
Right.
So I'm going to work really hard to try to facilitate that and to keep us at 2 hours or less on a meeting, unless we know it ahead of time and I can give you guys some warning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. Sounds fine
and
to me.
I just want to be really clear. I didn't put any missive out to people. I had a couple people come to me with concerns, and one of them is out trying to find somebody to fill a vacant seat, and it's really hard to convince people to run for council when it's 2-hour meetings a week. That gets hard to promote. Yep. So I understand that.
I appreciate that. When people approached me, I told them that it was mostly 1 meeting a week, and that the staff were very good at keeping the meetings to 2 hours or less. So this month didn't represent that. So that's challenging when I tell people it's about 1 meeting a week and then we have more. So I appreciate you trying to figure out how to cull it back to 1 a week.
I think it's good if we're all committed to make sure the meetings expedite and don't keep circling. That's not just on the chairs, that's on all of us.
Right.
So I will say we have some pretty fine chairs right now that help me keep everything going. So this month we're going to do council workshop next Wednesday, community development on the 17th, and finance better 21st or 28th, the week before Christmas. So can we meet both of those Mondays, the 21st and the 28th?
I'm
good. Yeah.
You're good. So we would do a workshop on the 21st, and I think Terry and Megan might have some feedback and some information to share from the training that we went to. Yes. Okay. And then on the 20th.
Sophie, did I miss you? Did you say we have a Wednesday workshop?
No.
Or did I hallucinate?
You did say that.
I heard that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I started to panic.
Oh, no panicking. Comp plan is today. Council, got it. Council, regular council meeting on the 14th. On the 17th is community development, which is a Thursday. The 21st is a Monday, and we would do a workshop. And so that would be the social and racial justice and whatever else we need to pick up for that workshop. And then on the 28th, we would do a finance committee meeting, which gives finance staff time to get everything prepared and out to you guys. And then I'll just kind of keep that general idea moving forward if that works for you.
Yep. Good.
So just a quick reminder to folks that I am at your beck and call, right? You email, I try to get back to you as quickly as I can, or you call. Nancy, oftentimes, especially when things are crazy in the office, she will reach out to you at my request to see if we can reschedule something or to make an appointment or to ask a question. But it's important for you guys just to remember that Nancy's email is not something that she looks at or I look at outside of regular business hours. So if Nancy takes a day off, she's not going to look at it. If she's going to take more than a day or two, then I will forward her phone to me. So I'll get the voicemail, and Bella or I might go in and check her emails, but that we don't do just if she's going to miss one day. So if you need to be in touch with me, you really should either be calling, texting, or emailing me. Any of those ways will get to me, and I'll be able to respond. And you are not bothering me. If I am too busy to answer, I will not answer. Just also want to remind folks that we are embarking on this wonderful Light Up the Community endeavor, and it's really cool to see some of what the private citizens are doing. If you look down on the Stillwater Trail and other places, people have really gone the extra mile to try to make this great for our community. As we walk through this process, we just want to remind folks to try to stay away from the blinking lights, and most definitely stay away from the rapidly blinking lights, because it can cause issue to photosensitive folks, especially folks with epilepsy. So we're going to be getting some more information about that out on our Facebook page, but we want to, if you can help when that comes out by sharing, you guys know more people than I do, that would be great. And I'd really appreciate it, because the thing that we want is for everybody to be able to enjoy the season and not get into trouble because of the season. Absolutely.
So I had a quick question about that, and I don't know if anyone can answer this or not, but I really appreciated that email that we got about the blinking lights and the potential impact. Even though they're not blinking, I know LED lights, which I have everywhere, some people say have sort of a flickering thing based on the circuit and how it alternates. Are those something we should? Okay, I just didn't know. I mean, so but I didn't Google it either. Sorry.
Yeah, the only thing that I found was a suggestion that if you slow it down so it blinks less than, I want to say 15 times I can't remember, Sam, a second. Maybe it's a minute. So if you slow it down, it doesn't have that triggering effect. But I have not done enough research, and the person who shared the concern has not been back in touch with me.
Okay, I think regular LEDs are probably fine, and I certainly can't afford to have the number of lights up that I have. So,
just also want to let you know that we are working with the farmers market to bring the market back down to the Pine Street lot for the winter market. That's an every other week market. We're doing that, understanding that they will continue to follow the public health guidelines, and if we have an outbreak, which is different than a spike in COVID-19 cases in Orono, then our requirements might change. But for now, we are just following CDC guidance. The other piece that's important for everybody to understand is that Public Works is happy to try to support things that happen in our community, but if it snows on a market day, I don't have anybody assigned to just go do parking lots and take care of a specific spot. We're down 2 people in Public Works right now. We've got the position that didn't get funded, the winter position that we elected not to fund this year because of budget constraints. And we have an open equipment operator position that we have gone out twice to try to find somebody to fill, that we're having difficulty. So Rob is shorthanded.
I think that makes perfect sense, but I hope we have some sort of communication structure in place if that call has to be made, so we don't get a bunch of farmers showing up to what's the plan there?
So the way that we have, the way we've done it in the past is that we don't tell them they can't come. If they want to come and put up in a couple inches of snow, if it's snowing, they're welcome to do that. What we're telling them is, if it snows a lot on Friday night, there are probably going to be big piles in the parking lot that they're going to have to work around. And if it starts snowing at 3 o'clock in the morning, we're not going to be comfortable going through the farmer's market with a plow truck. That's just seems like a recipe for disaster. So we would do the best we could to keep the parking lot as clear as we could, but they have to work around what we're doing, because we don't want to tell them they can't come. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Perfect.
Okay. Nomination papers were went out or were available November 30th. They have to be back by January 7th, by the end of business. We've had some questions that have come up around how do you circulate in a pandemic. Shelley has done a fabulous job trying to get Secretary of State to give us information. But the easy answer with that is that an individual can circulate as many pieces, as many nomination forms as they want. You don't have to have it all on one form. You just need to have the circulator, which doesn't have to be the candidate, sign the form where they take the oath that they circulated it, and the candidate has to sign the consent that if they are if they win the election, that they will serve. So if people are running into trouble and not comfortable circulating, I think Shelley has a few more creative ideas that I will let people just contact her with, because I don't want to send you in the wrong place. But there are some workarounds, but they have to be, in order for it to work, we have to see signatures on the page of registered voters, and you've got to have between 25 and 50. And I don't know, Councillor Osher is asking, she's having some technical difficulty, but she's asking how many people have taken papers out. I know only one that I'm aware of at this moment, but I have not gone down and asked. I usually refrain from doing that until we get closer to them being here.
I did ask last week, and at that point there had been a total of 3, 2 present council members and 1 who was not a council member at this point.
Sophie, could I also add that one of the things I was thinking about when we had this conversation previously about the interactions with COVID, we're all wearing masks anyway, but I might suggest that if the pen is the issue, I carry Purell with me all the time. So if somebody uses it, immediately wipe it, clean it, give it to the next person. So it just puts another layer in there to make a bit more comfortable for people.
Good suggestion.
We're getting really good at having buckets, Terry, a bucket of pens that haven't been sanitized that then end up making their way into the other bucket, and we sanitize it and start all over. And I would just encourage people, Shelley is here as a resource, and if folks have questions, they should feel comfortable to reach out to her directly. And I think that's it for me.
Awesome.
Well, all right then. I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Okay. Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Who seconded?
Good night.
Megan, who seconded? Cheryl seconded?
I pointed to Cheryl, who's this way on my screen. Okay. Cheryl.
That way. No, that way.